Yesterday we heard from a lot of different sectors. We broke out into some different groups and had some really good conversations. This is our opportunity to kind of come back together and talk about those things as a group. And particularly, we want to talk about how does industry and how do advocates and how do the community all work together to make this possible, right? This is not an easy endeavor. We have a lot of these conversations, and success for one of us can't be done without success with all of us. So we're going to just kind of dive into some of the considerations that go into designing trials, incorporating feedback, partnering together, and just how that all goes behind the scenes, because I think this is something that's really important. These are conversations that often happen behind closed doors, and our goal is to bring as many of the community members into this conversation as we can. Okay, so before we kind of dive in, can we just do some quick introductions? So maybe we'll start down at the end with Henk and then come along down.
Testing, yeah, it's working. So good morning all. Very happy to see you all, and it's always a pleasure to be in conferences with patients. I learn every time new things. My name is Henk Schuring. I'm Chief Regulatory and Commercialization Officer at Prelenia. Have been about 30 years now in the pharmaceutical industry, about 25 years in rare diseases, for which I'm passionate about. And why? I'm especially passionate to work on diseases where no treatments are yet available. I've done about 6 so far in my career, and every time it is a battle to get through it, and every time I learn from patients things that I had never thought of before.
Hi everyone, it's really great to be here, and I love coming to the HDYO conferences. My name is Peter McColgan. I'm a global development leader in Roche. I work across from phase 1 trials all the way to phase 3. So a bit about me. I'm a huntingtons disease neurologist. I've been working in HD nearly 13 years now. All from seeing patients and families in clinic to doing research, first at UCL and more recently over in Roche. I love working in this community. It's a real honor and a pleasure. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Astri Arnesen. I'm from Norway, and I'm the president of the European Huntington Association, and we are an umbrella for all the Huntington associations throughout Europe. That's actually 33 countries that already have a Huntington association. So I've been in Huntington's disease for 62 years because my mother developed the disease throughout my adolescence and early adulthood. So that's why I'm here.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Holder. I am from North Carolina in the States. I am gene positive for HD and a long-time patient advocate for this year's 20 years actually. I began with fundraisers and have now really gotten into advocacy with other patient advocates and trying to accelerate HD research and focusing on the regulatory side and all of that. But I also do, most people are more familiar with my podcast. So I do a podcast for the HD community through Help for HD.
Awesome. So we're going to just dive into some questions that we kind of sketched out. I'd love to start with Henk and Peter. If you guys could just kind of give an overview of all, not all, but some of the big considerations that happen before we can bring a drug into a clinical trial, right? So developing an investigational therapy is a really long, complicated process. There's a lot of moving parts. I don't think that the community really gets to see all those moving parts. So just shed some light on some of those.
Yeah, of course. I think Rachel did a great overview of this on Saturday, but to take a drug from an idea or from a molecule to get it to the patient takes a long time, and it takes a lot of work, and from pharma, from academia, and most importantly from patients and families. We really have to start with the molecule. We have to know if it's safe in animals first. We test it in cells and animals and then move into phase 1 trials. The objective of a phase 1 trial is to make sure the drug is safe, and potentially you might see if it has some effect depending on what you're looking at. So that's usually a relatively small number of people. A phase 2 trial, then you want to see if the drug has some signs that it works, so that would include more people. And then a phase 3 trial is many, many more people, so you can say definitively whether it helps in, symptomatically in the disease, or maybe stopping or slowing progression. So it takes time.
Hank?
So let me add a few things to that, because Rachel this morning and yesterday did a great job in showing you all the work and all the companies. Let me try to give some ideas around this, because as Peter said, development from a molecule to getting an approval takes long. And when we talk about long, we talk about 7 to 10 years. Investments of $1 billion or plus. And in addition, if you look to the numbers, only 3 in about 1,000 of molecules that come from the ID make it to an approval. So it is a very tough one, and it's also the most regulated industry that you can think of. Before we can start a clinical trial in humans, we have to submit a protocol to the authorities, whether that is FDA or local authorities in other countries, to get approval on the design, and they will look at it, whether all the data from animals and additional data from the quality of the product are meeting standards and that it is safe to use in humans. The animal studies take about 2 to 3 years before you can even think of starting human trials. Clinical development, dependent on the disease, like in Huntington's disease, where you need, because of the slow progression of disease, long trials, the clinical development phase is easily going to be 4 or 5 years before you get at the end of it. So that gives you a flavor. There's a lot of work ongoing, but a lot of risk and a lot of challenges, and unfortunately several products fail before they reach any of these stages.
Thank you both. So just kind of building on that, when we do get to the clinical trial stage, how do we think about some of these considerations, like in terms of where we're going to run a trial, how we're going to include different sites, how we're going to include different groups of patients? How does that all come together?
I'll give a first shout out on that. I still have the microphone. So you look always, where are patients? The first question is, because we always talk about Huntington's disease or any disease, but diseases are not prevalent in the same way across the globe. If we talk about Huntington's disease, we know that, for example, in Asia, the prevalence is lower than in the US and northwest of Europe. So you look, where are the patients? Then you look at where are the researchers, the clinical researchers that can do these trials. And then you look at endpoints, who has the equipment to do the endpoints, because in many trials in Huntington, imaging is used. That imaging equipment is not everywhere available, so multiple things of that. You also talk to patients. What are the endpoints that they feel are relevant? How can we include them? We talk to the regulators, and then they will tell us, no, we don't like that endpoint. We want to see a functional endpoint, like FDA will tell us we want total functional capacity. Europe may say, we like another endpoint. So it's a whole complex system where we talk to all the stakeholders and find the right patients at the right place, because in the end, we also are looking at how fast can we enroll a study. So where are the patients? Do they meet the criteria that we want to use for those patients to be enrolled in the study? Because we are also looking to studies that will be having a high chance of success. So unfortunately, that means that not everybody who wants to be participating in a study can always participate in a study.
Thanks. Just to add to that, I think we're in a really fortunate position in HD at the minute, because there are so many companies that want to do trials in HD, and I think the more companies and the more molecules that we look at, the closer and the faster we'll get to treatments for patients in the clinic. But along with that comes a challenge, because to do so many trials across the globe, we need more sites. And we need patients and families. We need you guys to be involved so that we can do all these trials. And I think that's something that as a community we need to we need to think about, with being in the fortunate position that there are so many molecules that are being tested, in terms of how we think about sites or how we select sites. As Henk said, the sites need to have enough people and staff to do the trials. They need to be able to do MRIs, brain scans, lumbar punctures, and things like that. I think Enroll HD, the observational study, is really useful because if we know a site is in Enroll, we know that you have neurologists there that are familiar with HD, that are familiar with the trial assessments that we typically do. So for me, when I speak to my operations colleagues and we're thinking about a trial, the first question I ask is, if we're thinking about a site, are they an Enroll site? Because that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I do want to go to Lauren and Astri.
Okay.
Lauren, go ahead, but as you know, Astri, as you're thinking about this also, you guys have been in this a long time. You guys have been around for so many trials. I'd love to get your thoughts after Lauren, you talk. What do you guys think about as when you hear about new trials being started? How are you thinking about mobilizing community resources?
Yeah.
You first.
So, a lot of times at these conferences, we're hearing about what it is that the pharmaceutical companies are doing and the researchers are doing, and what we don't hear about is the behind the scenes of kind of what incredible women like Astri has done, where she's created this wonderful group called HDYO to be an advisory board for pharmaceutical companies, and there are now conversations being had with patients at the table, right? So a lot of these issues that you're hearing are now involving patient input, and that's huge, right? Because there are things that this is where we bridge the gap. This is where we provide feedback as the experts in our lives to help find solutions to the issues that are being raised when it comes to finding a site. Where are those patients? All of that. So I just wanted to point that out, that right now is such a good time for us as far as HD research goes, especially because we have a voice as the patients and participants. And we are starting to help with trial design and making things more effective to move things forward faster. And I wanted to point that out. I also want to point out, I hear a lot about Enroll HD and a lot of choosing that for sites. The problem is Enroll HD is not everywhere. And so we're missing a lot of people if we're just focusing on Enroll HD. And so that's kind of a little pet peeve with me, is because I feel like there's so many people who are being missed because it isn't everywhere and isn't necessarily the end-all be-all when it comes to choosing. And I'm going to let Astri talk. So, what was your other question?
Just kind of when you learn about new trials being initiated, what are you doing behind the scenes? All those, Astri, you've done this for years. You're engaging in the community. How are you starting those conversations? How are you initiating it?
Yeah, so usually, I'm leading an organization and a point of kind of contact for Europe. And that's a very good position to be in, because the companies can find us, or we can find them if we hear about them being in the field, actually. So we are getting connected, and they are talking about where they are in their programs, what they are thinking about to do, and we are able to tell about how does this community look like. Because when Henk says, where are the families, where are the people affected, nobody knows that better than us. Nobody knows fully, because we are not registered, we are not mapped as people affected by the disease, but we are the best network that exists together. So that's how we try to draw this map and to see where are the potential. And I think definitely we are in a breaking point in time, because the previous studies have been studying patients with more symptoms, further down the road in the disease. All the new companies, all the new projects now want to do it earlier. That makes perfect sense. We want to treat as early as possible before really symptoms are affecting your ability to live your life. So that gives us new opportunities, but also new challenges, and we need to work even more and long term to continue to map. Where are you, folks? Because you are not even in clinic. So this is how we need to find new ways to connect, to educate ourselves, to empower ourselves, to know what's going on, and how can I potentially take action. And that's through organizations, honestly. I mean, Lauren, you are running so many things and initiatives and also point of contact, and so are we. And there are HDYO. I mean, we are many, and we are connected also. So actually, in the rare disease world, we are a quite unique network.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, right? Like if you're not sure who to reach out to any, right? You know, everyone here is connected. We talked a little bit about site selection and how that works. I'd love to talk a little bit more about how, you know, that study design aspect works. You know, you guys have all been in rooms together talking about protocols, talking about programs, how you're going to go about these things. I'd love to hear if there's, you know, if you had like one aha moment that you felt like, oh, the industry partners really get it, or I've taught them something. And you guys from industry, anytime that you really learned something that you were able to implement directly into your program or your protocol.
Aha moment. I have been part of several advisory board meetings with HDCAB, the HD Community Advisory Board. I think for me, it's incredible going in to a follow-up one, right? Because you go to an initial one and you provide feedback on what you think will work, what language works, because you literally get into the nitty-gritty in these meetings and trying to find solutions. You know, do these terms work, or are they too much? And every part of it, every part of the design of it to help reach the community. But I think for me, it's when I go into a second meeting in the advisory board and I see that they've implemented. And for me, that means a lot. It means that they have actually listened to what we have said are issues or barriers and have come back and put it into action and implemented. Or if they couldn't, they told us why. And I think that's huge. To me, for them to take the time to do that and to come to the table again and try to continue to find solutions, it's huge.
Have you seen that kind of evolve over the years?
Yeah, I would say it has. Yes, it's happening more and more, for sure.
I would just add, I think there is a huge interest to listen out. We see that the companies all are really interested in hearing your opinion, our opinions on things, and where we are from, and what our wishes and needs and desires are. So that's definitely the sense that I get, and that we are really listened to, and as Lauren said, they take it into consideration and do changes and adaptations if they can. Sometimes they can't for good reasons. And that's okay. And I think when you ask about an aha moment, we had during the pandemic, we had an online advisory board where we did really quite thorough. People were telling about their lives, the CAB members, sharing 5 minutes about their lives and how HD affected them. And after that meeting, it was very general kind of over what is it about. And I think for that company to really, wow, is it this complex? They went back and they said, you know what, you have given us so much to think about that we need to just take a foot in the ground and take a breath, actually. So there are many things that we need to continue to talk about to make them understand what they need to understand.
Yeah, you always talk about, you know, families and people living with HD are very, you know, unique. That's a unique expertise, right? You guys are the experts in the room. So you really feel like that when you're in those advisory committee meetings.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there are excellent experts in their field around the table from the other side. But to understand how this looks in the life of a person affected is not possible. You don't learn it in school. You only learn it through these human meetings and the communication that CAB as an instrument facilitates.
Peter and Henk, anything from your side?
So I wanted to add something, because I often hear from patients, I want to be involved, but I don't know what I should share and how I can share. It's probably about 20 years ago that I was at a meeting with the authorities, and one of the regulators asked a physician, why do you know that this product works? And the physician said, he gave the answers. Primary endpoint was met, secondary endpoint was met, and then the regulator said, no, that's not what I want to know. I want to know what it meant for patients. What have you seen in your patient? This physician waited a few moments and then said, well, during the study, one of my patients came to me and he said, Doctor, I am on the product and I know it works. And the physician said, how do you know that you're on the product? It's a placebo-controlled. I don't even know what you get. And this was a patient with another rare disease, mucopolysaccharidosis 1, that impacts through an accumulation of gags, as they call it, joints. So the shoulder is not working well, elbows, fingers. And this patient said, Doctor, for the first time in years, I have been able to comb my own hair. And I was sitting there and I listened and I was like, shit. I wish we had known this earlier, and I wish we would have been talking to patient organizations so we could have had an endpoint around quality of life aspects that would have measured this. Would have been much easier than measuring shoulder flexion and all these other things we did, or a 6-minute walk test. And to me it was a great lesson in understanding we need to talk to the patients, we need to know their stories, but we also need to know every tiny detail that you may even think is not relevant, because having used this endpoint could have made our life so much easier in getting a regulatory approval as well as the next step. Because after a regulatory approval, there is this phase called health technology assessment, where payers are looking at it and they really care about what does it mean for the patient. So please keep telling your stories, keep telling them through the patient organizations, as these tiny things, as you may feel, are incredibly important sometimes in understanding the disease and getting it through the various phases.
Peter, any insights?
Hard act to follow.
Hard to follow, no.
I wanted to come back to what Lauren has said. I mean, we've had interactions with HDCAB that have been really, really helpful, and with many other organizations around HD. It's really, really important when we're designing protocols, when we're designing like the schedule of assessments, that we can speak to patients and family members and understand how it fits into their life, because we need to fit around their life, not the other way around. And as Astri said, you know, a lot of the companies are moving to do trials in people that are younger with earlier stage disease. And I think what we really learned at previous interactions with HDCAB and the like was that these are people that have really busy lives, that have families or are working full time, and we need to design our protocols with that in mind so that, you know, we can accommodate them to, you know, when they're working, when they need to arrange childcare and stuff like that. And we've been able to take that back and put it into our protocols, so it's massively helpful.
Yeah. It sounds like obvious, I think, right? Like, oh, we need to make it, right? I mean, you guys are probably like, yeah, obviously, we have lives, we have family, but it's really challenging when you get into a clinical trial design setting to make, there's so many moving parts, right? I mean, there's so many visits, there's so many things that we're trying to assess, and we have to make it all work.
Can I add to that? Because this is very relevant. So there are a lot of practical hurdles related to people managing their life. They have to travel in for the clinic and do the test and everything. And I think that those are really real issues. But also for us, it's so important to have the people doing the trial understanding what it takes emotionally and psychologically. Because I met with a person who is in a trial, and he said to me, before I entered this trial, I try to put HD as much as possible in the back, because I have my life, I do my job, I have my relationships, and I want to do that in the time I still have the capacity to do so. And now, since I joined that trial, I have HD smashed into my face every bloody day. So it's a huge take on. And I admire those people who do it, and we really argue and advocate for support. Because they can stand in this, but we should provide them with proper support to ventilate this and to do as little as possible to smash it in more than need be, you know, and these things. So there are so many psychological aspects that are overlooked to some extent.
It's a great point, Astri, and I want to add one on that, which often gets forgotten. So many studies in Huntington's disease have a placebo-controlled phase and then have an open-label extension. Often patients have to go through the consent form again to enter the open-label extension. The timing of when you do that may become very important, and what we hear back is that sometimes this consenting process, which can take an hour to go through all those pages, if you do that before you do certain assessments in the study, at a study visit, it will probably impact the outcome. Because if you go with a patient and a caregiver through 20 pages of legal document, which is difficult to follow, that's not easy to then next do a total functional capacity test or one of the other tests that is needed for the trial. So some of these things that we hear back through the patient organizations and other feedback, we really have to start thinking on how we operationalize that when we do clinical trials, as it may have impact that we don't expect.
And do you know what's in those informed consent forms? If you have a lethal disease. So if you are already in a trial of Huntington's disease, you have kind of the potential to have it's a lethal disease. And you have to be reminded about that in an informed consent. These documents are so strange in their format that it makes my hair gray. That's why I'm gray, actually. I blame them.
I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
No, but Astri makes a great point. There is a huge gap when it comes to mental health in our community. It is a serious crisis, and it is something that we should be taking more seriously, because Astri's right. Participating in things is hard. I've participated in many observational studies. I've participated in a clinical trial now. I will not say it's easy. I will say it's rewarding. And I would do it over and over again because of the fact that it empowers me. I feel like I'm part of the solution. And so even though it's hard and mentally sometimes it's draining, and at the end of it I may want to sleep for a few days, I would go back every month and do it because it matters. And because that is what is going to move us toward prevention and toward having a treatment and slowing the progression of this disease. And it's so important that we participate. And even if you're not doing a clinical trial and you're doing the observational studies, such as Enroll HD, those observational studies are extremely important because that's what leads to the breakthroughs that then go towards those clinical trials and medications. So we need to do a better job as far as mental health for our community. Absolutely, 100%. We need to be working even harder on that. But I hope that people realize, like, it is absolutely worth it to participate even when it's draining.
Yeah. You guys have brought up some really good points. Astri, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's so, valid and important that you bring that up, because of course, if we don't participate in trials, no drugs will be developed. That's just a fact. So we advocate for how can we make this experience as best possible that we can.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that as we're thinking about, bringing patients into clinical trials is kind of at the forethought, right? How can we make this less burdensome? How can we get over those barriers? You guys, how have you done that in your clinical trials? How have you lowered that burden or lowered the, that initial hump to make it easier? Like, what have you done to provide resources or support for patients?
Maybe along those lines, I think one example I can think of where we're starting to do this is around our digital assessments. So when we did these in the Generation HD1 study, people were doing these every day, and as Astri, as you said, I think that's a challenge, right? Because if you have to do an assessment every day, it's a reminder about HD. And you know, we took that feedback and we went back to our digital team, Jonas, who's here, and said, you know, can we make this less burdensome? And we need to realize that when you ask someone to do a test every day, you're reminding them about the HD. And so this is, again, something that we've been able to implement going forward to do the test less often, just collect as much as we need to try and reduce burden, but reduce the reminder as well.
It's a difficult one, and I wish I had a clear answer, but it is always, you try to reduce the burden for patients as much as possible. And one of the challenges there is also that in HD, it's not only the patient coming to a clinical site, it's also the caregiver. So it's an impact on family, caregiver, and patient. And you're probably going to be away for a whole day for all the assessments. And if you then live away 3-4 hours from a clinic, that is tough. So our study was done to prove HD during the COVID pandemic. So we tried to do things like adding virtual TFC visits instead of doing them in the clinic. Due to that, we also had not a real opportunity for people to go for a lumbar puncture every time, because that would have to be in the clinic. So we tried to make it as convenient as possible, given the molecule we had, and give patients also information on why we did it. But it is not necessarily always easy, because on the other hand, we have regulators who ask us to do certain assessment and with a minimal frequency to allow to get a real understanding of how that endpoint worked over time in the study. So finding that balance is difficult. And in some of these cases, it's even important to bring a patient advocate to the meetings with the regulators to help them understand the burden or what an assessment means and what it means to a family and the caregiver.
That's a great segue to another question that I wanted to ask, which is, how does that work? We talk about regulatory bodies, we talk about those meetings. You know, what role do the regulators play when you're building a study, when you're designing a study? And from the advocacy standpoint, how have you engaged with regulators, and what are those opportunities like? Any takers?
Yes, so again, I have to speak for Europe because it's a complex global picture, but still it's, there are similarities across the Atlantics and throughout the world, but still it's for Europe I have my experience. And here we have the European Medicine Agency being one door in for having these trials and results and data they collect verified to see, is this safe and does it show any effect? So then the EMA says, okay, this is safe and it's efficacious to some extent or a lot, and then they say yes. And then automatically, or more or less automatically, all the countries in Europe, in the Union, say, okay, then we rely on the EMA. But then, from there, before I thought that, okay, job done. But it's not. It's not. Because after that comes another really tedious journey, which is called health technology assessment, where other regulatory bodies are supposed to see, okay, this new drug is safe and it shows some efficacy, but how is it compared to what else out there on the market? Let's compare with aspirin. We have had aspirin, I don't know, how old is that drug? 100 years or something? We've had it, it's a painkiller. But we have, I don't know how many other painkillers we have developed. And every time that's being approved to be given to patients and paid for, there are regulatory bodies evaluating, is this new drug better? Is it adding something new? Is it beneficial in ways that can fit into this, our country, basically? It's done in every country, and some countries even in regions. And then they says, okay, what's the value of it? What is it? What are we gaining? So this is a complex really journey. And it's not just for us to raise our hand and say, okay, we are here, we think this is beneficial, we want this, we think it adds real value. If I can comb my hair, it helps in my life with all other respects. So we, again, it's the organization, and it's on a high level we are able to engage in those regulatory procedures. And as European Huntington Association, in collaboration with other disease groups here in Europe, we do a lot to have our voice heard at these tables where these decisions are being made, And we need more people to be helping us, supporting us. So there is a space for others to engage with us in those procedures, I would say.
Amazing. Yeah.
So let me go back to the regulatory process, because the health technology we should talk about as well, but that's always the phase after the regulatory approval. So you asked about a regulatory process for a clinical study. So once you have had the interactions with physicians in an advisory board with patients, and you have come to your draft protocol, you submit it to the various regulatory authorities. So in the US, that would be FDA, Canada, that would be Health Canada, Europe, it would be the national authorities of each country. So it's not one body that sees it in Europe. If you go to 9 European countries, you go to 9 different countries, and they have 9 different opinions. Then you will get the feedback on your protocol, which you will have to address. You may have meetings where you can bring an expert physician or you can bring a patient to discuss, and then you want to get one global protocol. In Huntington, what we have seen, for example, is that FDA is very keen, based on the 2015 Voice of Patients meeting, on total functional capacity as the primary endpoint. Our Roche colleagues did a lot of work on the composite UHDRS, which in Europe is much more acceptable as a primary endpoint. So you already see the challenge. What is the primary endpoint in the US? What is the primary endpoint in Europe? How do you correlate that if you want to do one global study? So that whole process, unfortunately, takes easily 9 months before you get that totally aligned and can start a study. And that is part of how we handle that. During those meetings, we sometimes bring patients or patient advocates, that depends on the country, to the meetings and help the regulators understand what it would mean for a patient to do a certain assessment, what the burden is. Because, well, we have a lot of people here in the room who know HD. You have to go from the starting point that most of the regulators may have not even heard of the disease when we start coming with these rare diseases where no treatments are available, and start talking about it. So there's a huge need for them to hear what is the daily life of a patient, how does this affect the family and the patient, and educate them. And that same process is valid for payers, as Astri pointed out already, during health technology. Because again, they have probably never seen a Huntington patient. They don't understand what happens on a daily basis. So they all need to be educated.
So I'm going to speak for the U.S. The FDA is its own beast. It is not an easy entity to necessarily work with. But what I have learned is that they need to hear from more than pharma and more than just from researchers. Not that it doesn't matter, like absolutely their viewpoints matter, but there has to be a collaboration, and there needs to be advocates, patient advocates, working alongside those companies to show why the drug matters, because they're going to look at this drug being presented, and if they don't have anybody from a disease group speaking up saying, oh no, we want this is important to us because this affects us, they're just going to think it doesn't matter. And so our voices truly do matter as patients and participants, because the FDA needs to hear how HD affects us and how these drugs could help us, especially because we don't have anything. They have different departments. They have a department that focuses on gene therapies. They have specific neuroscience departments, and everything's kind of broken up. And so it's not necessarily that you're speaking to one. It's having conversations with multiple different departments and being consistent with those conversations, and collaborating with all stakeholders in the HD space to make sure that we are all on the same page and aligned and trying to move towards the same thing. But nothing's going to be approved without them hearing from us, because if they don't know that we want it, they really are not going to take as much interest. I have found that over the years, they have taken more of an interest in what the patient perspective is. That was very evident last year. We did a meeting with the FDA, and normally FDA in these meetings they're there to listen. They're not there to speak up. And in our meeting, they were not getting the answers they needed for their questions, and they spoke up because they needed to hear it. They needed to know. And it was really good that they weren't there just listening, they actually interacted. And it showed me how much it means for us to be there sharing how this disease affects us. I also am very involved with speaking to Critical Path Institute, which is an organization that's kind of a liaison between disease communities and FDA. And they're very helpful in providing education on how to proceed with things, and guidance. And so I think utilizing the resources that are there is very important as well. But we as a community, this is the time to speak up. We've got a lot of things that are going to the FDA for things, and they need to hear from us.
Yeah, you brought up a couple really important things, so I want to just touch on them, and then I'll turn it back to Astri. But the sessions that you mentioned, they're actually called patient listening sessions with the FDA. That's what the FDA has named them. And they're part of what the FDA calls their patient-focused drug development programs, where they actually do really want to understand patient and family experiences. And they've actually built this into their regulation, that they have a requirement to make sure that they do so many of these engagements, per year, so that that's a priority for them. That's how important it is that it actually was built into their, regulation, which is really, really exciting in terms of the progress that we've seen from that agency, because that's new over the last 10 years. One of the other things they've done in the review division that we work with, which is the neurology group, is that they've elevated someone at the FDA who is very focused and has led these patient-focused drug development initiatives, to kind of be a liaison between some of the different offices and be that advocate within the FDA for seeking out input and making sure that that's a priority, which is really exciting.
So let me just add to that you have exactly similar initiatives across the globe. Most European countries have this, Canada has this. So it's not only US, you can do this in every country. I think Barbara yesterday mentioned in the panel that AIVA in Italy has now established also this patient listening forum where patient organizations can speak up and talk about the disease. And you will find that in France, you will find it in the Netherlands, you will find it in Scandinavian countries. Anywhere you have this opportunity, and I think it's a great one. I thought earlier this morning, Rachel brought up Relivio, ALS. I think if there's a patient group that has been able to get a lot of access to various people, it has been ALS, and there are probably lessons to be learned from that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because we are talking about the healthcare system, so the regulators are part of our healthcare system and how it's set up. And it's, of course, hard competition in a way. We are not the only disease in the world. We are one of several thousand of the rare ones, and there are huge, disease groups in cancer and other areas. And I think for some reason that I don't understand, but it's clearly a fact, I think, is that the neurology diseases have been somehow prioritized in all elements of this game. So I think For us also, it's not just to approach directly regulators, because they are part of our society. They are human beings, actually, in those rooms. So they are also
They don't seem like it sometimes.
They are also influenced with stories that they hear or see, because I think the cancer community in particular has been extremely good in standing up, showing their stories and sharing and talking about their needs. And there are a lot of new therapies in the cancer being developed, and God bless. I wish all cancer patients all the best. But I think the needs that we represent has for some reason not been understood. And maybe it's because we are so often ashamed and afraid to share about it.
I agree. I 100% agree with that. You know, I don't know if you guys have seen commercials where a cancer drug or a drug for another disease pops up, and then they start going through the side effects. And I'll sit there and laugh, because I'll be like, okay, well, this just got FDA approved, and there's a ton of side effects to it, even death, you know, or kidney failure, different things like that. And yet here we are with some really great options, and it's like we're fighting so hard to be able to get even one thing. And, you know, you wonder why. Why is this happening? And it's because the neurologic diseases have really just kind of been pushed to the wayside. And but again, this comes back to we have to speak up about our disease, and that it's just as important.
I think along the lines with neurology, I think there's a paradigm shift. I mean, in neurology, maybe in the last 30 years, we were treating diseases when people had symptoms, when their diseases were advanced. And I think we've begun to think about this in a new way. And I mean, it makes sense scientifically. The earlier you can treat, the better outcomes you can have. I mean, I think it just makes sense. But I think we need to work as a community with regulators to get them on the same page in regards to that, and stop thinking about trying to have drugs for people when they have advanced disease, but, you know, even before people get disease, so we can have the best outcomes possible.
Yeah.
So listening to this, something came to my mind that I think I want to remind people about. If you look at multiple sclerosis, 26 years ago, there was no therapy, and it was considered an orphan disease. Now, there are probably about 20 plus approved treatments and several still in development, and it is no longer an orphan disease. So it is so important, and all of this started when Rebif got approved in 1999 in the US as the first ever MS treatment. So it's so important to not only think about getting the first approved, but also to make sure that we continue the development in how to get ultimately to the main objective of a cure. But I think there are lessons to be learned again from what happened in Rebif, how that first treatment helped the further development, helped diagnosing more patients, helped people getting more involved in the research, and motivated a lot of other companies to do even more.
So as we start to kind of wrap this session up, I just want to come back to, you know, how industry and advocacy partners work together. And I'd love to hear from all of you about any advice you can give to folks in the room that are thinking about, you know, getting more involved. What would you say to them in terms of how can they engage in industry, you know, advisory boards? What should they know before they start to get involved? What advice would you have?
As I said, there are opportunities to connect with an association, organization, which is a point of contact. But there is a lot you can do also in terms of stay informed, read about what's happening, orient yourself. And also, we are all from families. And to share information in your network, in your families or in other networks where there are people affected by this disease is super important. Super important, because it's really through the mouth of people we trust that we listen most. And that will just be more valid in these times when we have so much false information out there. So it gets more challenging actually to filter the sources that we can trust. So share, stay informed, learn, share in your networks, and if you have the will and wish to do so, contact some of us, and we can connect you into, we need people.
We do. We need people. And the great thing is our community is really wonderful about collaboration. So if I don't have an answer, I have no problem contacting Astri, Tina, Jenna, whoever, and doing a handoff to somebody who does know. So I think that's something to remember. It's okay to reach out and ask questions and find out like how you can get involved. A lot of times we're working behind the scenes and we're not thinking about reaching out at that moment. But if somebody sends us a message, then we're happy to respond and let you know where we need help. I think the other thing I would tell people is don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to push back. Be willing to speak up, share your story, and also, when you hear something and you're not sure if it's right or whatever, push back, ask questions. That's okay to do. We need that. But more than anything right now, we need people who are willing to step up and say to the regulators that this matters and that we need this. It can't be just one person. It needs to be our community consistently doing that together in order to make a difference.
I think for me the most important message is we couldn't do any of the things that we do without your help. We've made massive progress in HD over the last 10 or 20 years, and that's all because of people getting involved, because of patients and families. And I think even something small still makes a big difference. It doesn't need to be a clinical trial, doesn't even need to be an observational study. It can be filling out a survey or a questionnaire. I mean, every little bit helps us. The more that we can understand, the more that we can do our job to try and find treatments. But we can't do any of it without you. And so a massive thank you as well to everyone who's helped us get this far.
Well said.
I think I've given a few examples on how I've learned from patients and from patient organizations during my career. But I think the three words that come to my mind would start with be collaborative. Let's all work together because we have all one shared objective to get a first treatment and subsequent treatments approved for Huntington's disease. So let's all work together and share your voice. Be curious. If you hear something and you don't understand, please ask. Ask why. Why do you do that? Have you thought of this? Because that ultimately will help us make changes and we'll get to a better place. Not asking questions, not being curious, means we are probably more on the status quo. So be involved, be curious, ask your questions. And above all, let's stay authentic in these type of interactions because that is the most important part.
Absolutely, Henk. Well said. Any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, if this is my final sentence, I would just say I'm very hopeful. I mean, I've been hoping all my life, but really we are getting there, and I'm hopeful that in 2025 we will maybe have the first approval by the EMA, which is a major milestone. It won't be a cure, but it will definitely be a milestone that we hopefully can cross. And that will generate so much, I think, renewed hope and energy in the entire field, among everybody. As Henk said about the MS field, that when you first get across that finish line for somebody, it's easier to follow by others because we know that we are on the right track. So I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, I would say the same, that, it's a very hopeful time when it comes to research. I would say don't focus on the word cure. I personally do not like the word cure. It is not something that I never say that I'm hoping for a cure. If we can slow progression of this disease and buy ourselves some time, that's huge. So some type of treatment is what we should be hoping for, what we should be working towards, not even hoping for. We should be implementing things and working towards those treatments, and focus on that. And You don't have to be involved in a clinical trial to do that. You don't have to participate in observational studies. Even if you share your story, or if we're doing some type of call to action, and writing letters, just providing your voice or providing that signature goes a long way. So just keep that in mind, that those small things absolutely make a difference.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys for sharing your perspectives. It's amazing to see how much, industry and advocacy partners are working together and helping to educate regulators and learning from each other. Completely different than how things were, even 10, 15 years ago. So incredible progress. Thank you guys. Big round of applause for our panelists.
That was really great, thank you. I also wanted to, we mentioned HDCAB a few times, and if you attended Astri's session yesterday, you learned more about it, and we have a table too, but I just wanted to share a little bit more about that. It stands for Community Advisory Board, and it's a partnership between EHA, the International Huntington Association, and HDYO. And we talked a lot about the things that get discussed, but I think it's important to acknowledge that it can feel like we're very North American heavy on these advocacy efforts. And as Henk mentioned, there's a lot of different places that have really great advocacy movements. But especially for those of you, because this is an international conference, your voices are still being represented. And I just want you all, if you don't live in Europe, if you don't live in North America, your voices are being represented because HDCAB is international. And some of the biggest work that we do is at bringing those voices, encouraging our partners to really hear the needs of the different international communities on what's important to them, what do they need to see. And so I want you all to know that that happens, and we have, I think, how many, like 24 countries? 40 countries? We have 40 members, like 24 countries represented. And we need more. And so if you're interested in learning about participating in that, please stop by the EHA and IHA booth. And also get involved in IHA. They're doing great work. They helped Pakistan start an association. We're collectively working to help grow the Indian Association. So there's a lot of great work that we can all do collectively. So I just wanted to make sure that that you all know that those voices are being heard too in these arenas. So it really all matters. And being here and sharing your story is fantastic. And I'm just so grateful for this panel, because I just wanted to bring that to the forefront for all of you to know the work that's being done, and to encourage that if you feel like this is something you're interested in, your voice matters, and this is a way to get involved. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, can I just follow one thing? For those who truly, as far as something that makes me feel empowered, the HDCAB has been phenomenal. And being able to share a voice and get on there and see how many other countries are, it's truly just life-changing. So I just wanted to echo that. It's been wonderful.
This is great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ariana. Great panel.